Let's start here. Interpol says Dubai authorities were acting on their red alert notice when they arrested Atul and Rajesh Gupta. The brothers are accused of paying bribes in exchange for lucrative state contracts during the presidency of Jacob Zuma. While government has confirmed the arrest, it's however downplayed expectations that the brothers would be brought back to South Africa to face trial in the immediate future. So let's go to senior reporter Aviwe Mtila. Aviwe, tell us, what's the timeline from here on?
Around this time, back at the Bloemfontein Magistrate Court in 2021, of course, relating to that Nulane investment contract that they received back in 2011, where we understand 17 accused were supposed to appear at the Bloemfontein Magistrate Court related to that 24.9 feasibility study given to Nulane investment by the Department of Agriculture in the Free State that was supposed to conduct a feasibility study ahead of the Estina Dairy Farm project. We do understand back in 2011 that was subcontracted to Deloitte for a mere 1.5 million rand, and then the allegations are that over a period of 7 months that money was siphoned over, moving from one account to the next, eventually ending up at Island Site Investment, which is owned by the Gupta brothers. Now we do understand just on Friday they were arrested at the UAE, and the big question is whether these extradition talks will yield any results. In fact, I am joined by Professor Dept from the University of Pretoria just to get insight, of course, from the expert of international law. Thank you for joining us at eNCA, Professor. But I think the big question is that can the NPA succeed in extraditing the Guptas back to South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, can they succeed? I guess they can. So ultimately the question is the processes in the UAE itself. There is an extradition treaty, of course, between South Africa and the UAE, but that extradition treaty really governs the relationship between South Africa and the UAE. Ultimately, once the government of the UAE decides that it wants to extradite, a different process is triggered, whereby the persons being sought, the Guptas, can now challenge the decision of the authorities for extraditions. It's clear to me that in this instance there is a desire by the authorities in the UAE to extradite. That's clear from a number of things. One, the extradition treaty between South Africa and the UAE was a long time in the making. But things ran very quickly at some point last year. You'll remember that the extradition treaty was signed, I think, around about June of 2021, and very soon thereafter there was the exchange of instruments to actually ratify the treaty so that it entered into force in July. That's very, very speedy, particularly taking into account that countries like the UAE don't generally like to extradite and don't generally like to conclude extradition treaties. The fact that there's been arrest is a further indication that there is a desire on the part of the authorities to extradite. But that's not enough. The desire on the part of the authorities in the UAE is not enough. All that it does is it triggers, as I said, this new process whereby the Guptas can now challenge the extradition process.
Would there possibly be a time frame on how soon then the extradition can continue and have the Guptas back in South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, I was asked this question last year. I remember last year when the extradition treaty was signed, there was a lot of euphoria and people thought that the Guptas would be in the country immediately. And I remember saying, caution is required. It's a long process. And one never really knows how long it takes, because ultimately it depends on the domestic legal system of the state in which those that are wanted are held, right? So in our process, for example, it would take a very long time because you've got human rights requirements and all kinds of other rules that the persons that are sought can sort of throw at the authorities, keep challenging, particularly where the fugitives have deep pockets, because when you have deep pockets it means that you can hire big lawyers, and big lawyers can find all kinds of loopholes and they can let the process drag on for long. So it really can take an exceedingly long period of time, and I can't venture it.
I was about to ask for a time frame. Maybe yes. How long of a time can it take?
I mean, I really don't know. Ultimately, as I say, it will depend on the law of the UAE. And I mean, I can guess and say it can take anything from a year, 2 years, 3 years. Ultimately, it depends on the law of the UAE, and it depends also on the extent to which the fugitives, the Guptas, are able to launch legal challenges and different legal challenges, appeals, and so on and so on.
But just a quick one then. In the interim, what happens to the Guptas? They were arrested on Friday.
Right.
Do they remain in custody, or what happens, given that you'd understand that they possibly fugitives of the state?
Right. So normally, I mean, I think they can always request to be released, and normally in normal systems, the courts would take into account the question whether or not the accused, the people that are sought, the fugitives, are flight risks. And normally, the fact that you are subject of an extradition indicates that you're probably a flight risk. So normally in these instances it's very difficult, but it is possible. So one, it's possible. Two, it's again dependent on the particular rules of that particular state.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Dept, an expert of international law at the University of Pretoria, just taking us through what's most likely going to happen now, Masego. Of course, hearing there, it's not going to be a speedy process, given that the Guptas have their options, and of course the allegations of the billions that they have looted out of the country, making them able to take this matter with their legal team and just maybe delaying or even successfully challenging the extradition that's in process.
All right, Aviwe Mtila, let's leave it there for now.